General Hospital spoilers are out for the week of August 25, 2025. Fans should expect Britt Westbourne to become suspicious. Gio Palmieri connects with Dante Falconeri. Plus, Trina Robinson makes a startling discovery. Continue reading and let's discuss what's coming up on the ABC soap drama. Britt Westbourne suspicious. Let us begin with Britt, who is currently in Croatia. Jason Morgan will make a request, which may be to the brunette. In a preview for Monday's show, Jason promises to take her any place she wants to go. However, there could be more at risk than Britt's medication. Britt isn't mentioned again until Friday, when she appears suspicious. Pascal informs Britt on Monday that the WSB is investigating, but the situation is being addressed. However, Jason argues that he is there on his own. This could lead to Jason and Britt conducting their own inquiry. Gio Palmieri and Dante Falconeri reconnect back in Port Charles. Gio connects with Dante. This sounds like excellent news because Gio is unfairly upset with his entire family. Recently, Gio confided to Emma Scorpio Drake that he misses his family. This week, Gio discovers common ground with Marco Rios. So, ideally, this will mark a new beginning for Gio and Dante. Trina Robinson's discovery. General Hospital spoilers for the week of August 25 indicate that Trina makes a surprising discovery. It must be about Drew Kane. By the conclusion of the week, Portia had turned to Kai Taylor for support. If Kai wants to make things right with Trina, this might be his chance. Martin Gray also provides an update to Laura Collins for the week of August 25, 2025. Meanwhile, Lucy Coe confides in Jen Sidwell. Alexis Davis has been served with a restraining order. Ava Jerome issued a warning. Cody Bell opens out to Dante, while Molly Lansing Davis confides in Michael Corinthos. Additionally, Molly confronts Christina Corinthos Davis. What does this imply for their sisterly relationship? It was only recently fixed, so we'll see how Molly handles Christina. Meanwhile, Drew penalizes Michael. Plus, Jack Brennan will be conflicted. Portia Robinson passes another line. Stella Henry also expresses her fears. General Hospital spoilers reveal 3 must-see scenes for the week of August 25, 2025. Fans should expect Alexis Davis to be served with a restraining order. Gio Palmieri and Marco Rios find common ground. Plus, Britt Westbourne becomes suspicious. Continue reading and let's discuss what's coming up on the ABC soap drama. Let us begin with Alexis Davis, who is served. In a preview clip, Alexis is not at her law office. The lawyer is reviewing legal documents when she discovers an unexpected discovery. Alexis appears to blast an unseen person for enticing her over there solely to serve her with a restraining order. Could this restraining order be from Drew Kane? Perhaps it will be more difficult than everyone expects to stop Drew from taking Scout Quartermaine to DC. Britt Westbourne suspicious. At the start of the week of August 25, Jason Morgan makes another appeal to Britt. The right-hand man says he can take her any place she wants. Britt appears tempted, but her medicine may be a problem. There could be additional obstacles that prevent her from leaving. What if the individuals she works with had threatened Liesl Albrecht, or perhaps Rocco Falconeri? Perhaps this is why the truth about Rocco's childhood has finally come to light. By the end of the week, Britt becomes suspicious. Pascal informed Britt that the WSB was present, but it was being dealt with. What are the chances Britt discovers Vaughn and Jocelyn Jacks are the agents? 3 shocking moments rock Port Charles the week of August 25. Gio Palmieri and Marco Rios connect. This is the next spoiler I'm eagerly looking forward to. Gio and Marco eventually find common ground. We know Marco is collaborating with Jen Sidwell to pursue Sonny Corinthos. Sonny, however, is the only member of the family with whom Gio continues to communicate. Of course, Marco may not have grown up with his father, which could explain the shared experience. We don't know much about Marco's background or childhood, so this may be another plot thread. In any case, it sounds really interesting. I'm looking forward to Joe's forgiveness and reconciliation with his family. The young man admitted to Emma Scorpio Drake that he missed his family. So it appears that a reconciliation is imminent. Which narrative are you most looking forward to witnessing in the week of August 25, 2025? Share your opinions in the comments area below. Keep watching ABC soap operas to find out what happens next. The night air was thick with secrets, the kind that clung to the shadows and murmured in between words. Britt stood at the edge of the old pier, her boots scuffing against the aged wood as she looked out into the dark lake. The moon was a sliver, hardly enough to cast a reflection, but it was enough to reveal the disquiet that had settled into her bones. She'd always had a talent for detecting when something was wrong, a prickle at the back of her neck signaling her to pay attention. Tonight, that tingle became a scream. She tightened her jacket, the leather cracking quietly, and looked over her shoulder. The pier was empty, but she couldn't shake the impression that someone was watching and waiting for her to act. She'd been looking into things she shouldn't have: old files, encrypted letters, names that didn't belong in the peaceful coastal hamlet of Havens End. Her editor had advised her to drop it, but Britt was not the kind to let up once she had caught a scent. It began with a hint, a cryptic message tucked under her apartment door: check the warehouse on 17th. Look for a red ledger. She shrugged it off at first, blaming it on a prankster who had read too many of her investigative stories in the Haven Herald. But curiosity had a way of digging its claws into her, and before she realized it, she was sneaking into the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, a flashlight cutting through the darkness. The building was a jumble of rusting machinery and neglected cartons, the air thick with dust and a faint odor of oil. She had discovered the ledger, hidden behind a loose panel in a back room, its pages packed with coded entries and names she didn't know. One name, however, had stood out: Dante Russo. She knew him, or at least knew about him. Everyone at Havens End did. He was the type of guy who walked around town like a ghost, constantly on the outskirts, never quite fitting in. Britt had seen him a few times at the Rusty Anchor, a dive pub where people congregated to share stories and drown their sorrows. He was tall, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that appeared to see right through you. He remained to himself, nursing a beer in the corner, but there was something about him that grabbed attention, a quiet intensity that caused people to lower their voices around him. She had never talked to him, but the ledger altered that. His name was written next to dates and amounts that did not match up, transactions that indicated something larger than Havens End. Smuggling, perhaps. Or worse. Britt didn't know yet, but she was determined to find out. She'd spent the last week following him, piecing together his habits and looking for anything that could corroborate her assumptions. He was overly cautious, which further increased her suspicions that he was hiding something. Meanwhile, across town, Gio was having his own type of evening. The garage was quiet, with the only sounds being the gentle buzz of the neon sign outside and the occasional clink of a wrench against metal. He was elbow-deep in the engine of a '67 Mustang, the type of automobile that made his pulse race faster than anyone else could. To be honest, Gio was not much of a people person. Machines made sense: cause and effect, problem and solution. People were untidy and unpredictable, so he learned early on to keep them at arm's length. But Dante was different. They'd met years earlier, when Gio was still running with a rougher crew, and there was a link formed through late-night chats and shared secrets that neither of them wanted to explore. Dante had a way of making Gio come out of his shell, whether he liked it or not. Tonight, Dante had arrived unexpectedly, leaning against the garage door with that half-smile that always indicated trouble. "Do you have a minute?" he'd asked, and Gio knew better than to refuse. They'd ended up in the back office, a tiny space filled with invoices and coffee mugs, talking quietly about topics Gio didn't want to think about. Dante was more cagey than normal, his gaze darting to the door whenever a car passed by. He'd stated something about a bad transaction and the necessity to keep quiet for a while. Gio didn't ask for details, he never did, but he could sense Dante was up to something. His comments carried weight, attention that had not there before. Gio wanted to help, but he understood Dante's life was one he'd worked hard to escape. Gio nodded as Dante instructed him to keep an eye out for anything weird. Loyalty was a difficult habit to break. While Britt chased shadows and Gio struggled with old loyalties, Trina was on the other side of town, dealing with a different type of mystery. She worked in the local library, which matched her sense of order and quiet. However, her days have recently been anything but organized. It all started with a book, a battered, leather-bound volume she discovered misplaced on a shelf in the rare books department. It wasn't cataloged, which was unusual enough, but when she opened it, she discovered pages packed with handwritten notes, schematics, and what appeared to be a map. The handwriting was immaculate, almost compulsive, and it mentioned places in Haven's End she'd never heard of before, hidden coves, abandoned tunnels, and a lighthouse that had been sealed up for decades. Trina wasn't into conspiracies, but the book felt like a puzzle waiting to be solved. She'd spend her evenings reading over it, cross-checking names and localities against the library's records. That's when she discovered the connection to Dante. His name appeared on a worn newspaper item buried between the covers, a brief description of a fishing boat catastrophe from years ago. The article was brief, but it hinted at something suspicious, unreported goods and a crew that departed before the investigation could be completed. Trina didn't know Dante directly, but she'd seen him about and always had the impression that he knew more than he let on. The book, the clipping, and the map all pointed to something concealed in Haven's End, and Dante was key to it. As the days went, Britt's doubts grew stronger. She'd followed Dante to a remote beach one night, observing from afar as he met with a man she didn't know. They'd traded a duffel bag, their voices too low for her to hear anything beyond the occasional word, shipment, schedule, clean. She'd shot photos, her camera's shutter clicking silently in the dark, but the results were blurry and meaningless without context. Even so, they were enough to keep her digging. She began to see patterns, cars lingering too long outside Dante's apartment, cryptic messages written on burner phones she discovered referenced in the ledger. The deeper she went, the more hazardous it seemed, but Britt had never backed down from a story. Meanwhile, Gio began to see things that he couldn't ignore. A stranger had stopped by the garage, appearing to be a client but staying and watching too closely. Gio had dismissed him, but the meeting left a terrible taste in his mouth. He'd contacted Dante that night and warned him to be careful, but Dante shrugged it off, claiming Gio was overly concerned. Even so, Gio couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in. He began to pay closer attention to the people around him, the automobiles that drove by the garage, and the faces that seemed to occur too frequently. He didn't know what Dante was involved in, but he knew it wasn't good. Trina's revelation was also luring her in further. The book had taken her to the lighthouse, a dilapidated edifice on the outskirts of town that had not been used in years. She had gone there on a whim, telling herself it was merely for curiosity, but what she discovered made her heart accelerate. The entrance was open, which was weird enough, but inside, she saw evidence of recent activity, footprints in the dust, a crate half hidden behind a tarp. She didn't dare to touch anything, but she did take photos, her hands quivering as she realized she was standing in the midst of something she didn't quite understand. The map in the book had marked this location, and she was beginning to see why. There was a network here, something concealed beneath the surface of Haven's End, and Dante's name kept appearing. Britt's inquiry was beginning to connect with Trina's in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Britt had been researching the town's history, gathering records from the library where Trina worked. She'd noticed Trina's name on a number of the checkout logs, along with books about local maritime history. It was a minor issue, but Britt's intuition told her it was worth investigating. She approached Trina one afternoon, casual but direct, asking whether she had discovered anything peculiar in the archives. Trina had halted, her gaze drawn to the book she'd been perusing, but she brushed it off, claiming she was only a librarian, not a detective. Britt did not purchase it. She could see a spark of inquiry in Trina's eyes, just as she saw in herself. Gio, too, was starting to notice the ties that connected them all. Dante had mentioned Britt in passing, urging Gio to avoid her. "She's trouble," he replied, his voice tightening. "Always sniffing around where she shouldn't." Gio hadn't given it much consideration at the time, but after seeing Britt's byline in the Haven Herald, he began to worry. She was asking inquiries and probing into places that made Dante uncomfortable. And then there was Trina, who had been by the garage one day to inquire about an old boat her father used to own. The chat had been quick, but Gio saw how her gaze lingered on the tools, as if she was looking for more than answers regarding the boat. The three of them were circling the same fact, but from different perspectives. Britt, with her unrelenting need to discover secrets. Gio was split between loyalty to Dante and a nagging feeling that something was awry. Trina's calm curiosity had taken her to a riddle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. Haven's End was a small village, but it was filled with shadows, which were beginning to press in. The ledger, the book, and the lighthouse were all pieces of a puzzle that no one could fully comprehend, but they were all headed for the same inevitable collision. Britt made a decision while standing on the pier, with the wind conveying the faint sound of waves. She planned to approach Dante, lay her cards on the table, and see what he did. She knew it was risky, perhaps even reckless, but she had traveled too far to turn back. Across town, Gio was wiping grease from his hands and looked at his phone, unsure whether to call Dante and warn him about Britt. And Trina, sitting in her modest apartment, was flipping the pages of the book, her finger tracing the map that led to the lighthouse, wondering whether she could get the confidence to return. The night went on, and Haven's End held its breath, waiting for the moment when their paths would connect, and the secrets they were pursuing would finally be revealed. They had no idea what they'd find, but they were all drawn to something greater, something that would change everything. The truth was out there, hidden in the darkness, and they were running out of time to discover it. Alexis Davis had always taken pleasure in her ability to maintain control in the face of chaos. But the instant she stood in that quiet, strange spot, a big package of legal documents quivering in her grasp, it was as if the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. The shock was immediate, her heart thumping against her ribs as she read over the first few paragraphs, astonishment on her face. The words became confused for a little period, not because she couldn't understand them, but because she chose not to. She clenched her jaw, forced herself to concentrate, until she reached the part she hated the most, a restraining order. Her name appears in bold, alongside Drew Kane's. The pang of betrayal was so intense that Alexis couldn't breathe for a moment. Anger rose almost as swiftly as shock. She turned around, her gaze fixed on the mysterious figure who had invited her here under false pretenses. She slapped the documents down on a neighboring table and scowled at them, her voice trembling but sharp. "You lured me here just to serve me?" The person did not answer, and Alexis turned away, her chest heaving as she attempted to calm herself. Drew wasn't one of the people she expected this from, or so she thought. But when she thought about it, she realized how far Drew was willing to go to gain what he wanted, complete control over Scout's future. Scout Quartermain wasn't simply Alexis' grandchild. She symbolized everything Alexis had fought for: family, stability, and second chances. But Drew appeared set to uproot everything, to take Scout to Washington, D.C., without even a genuine discussion. It was no longer just about custody, it was about power, authority, and punishment. Alexis could still recall their heated chats from recent weeks, the polite but stiff smiles, and the subtle jabs that hinted at their increasing dispute. Drew had always been the measured voice of reason, but something had changed. Ever since his arrangement with a particular DC. Insiders had fell into place, and he had been adamant about obtaining what he wanted, regardless of the collateral damage. She collapsed onto a nearby bench, fingers grabbing the edge, her thoughts replaying the moment Scout's name appeared in the records. The prospect of losing her was awful, and Alexis felt her rage transform into something colder, tougher, resolve. Drew could serve her with as many legal papers as he wanted, but the fight wasn't finished. While Alexis was processing the blow she had just received, another storm was brewing across town, one involving secrets, deception, and a perilous game that few completely understood. Britt Westbourne had been walking on a razor's edge for weeks, her poise intact even while her world shifted around her. And at the center of the pandemonium was Jason Morgan, her former confidant and protector, who now stood before her with an offer that could change everything. "I can take you anywhere you want to go," Jason informed her, his voice low but steady, bearing an edge of eagerness that he couldn't quite conceal. His piercing blue eyes met hers, quietly pleading with her to trust him. Britt's breath seized in her throat. The temptation was obvious on her face, yet something held her back. Her fingertips brushed against the edge of the counter behind her, as if she needed something firm to support herself. "Jason." She started then stopped. How could she explain it without sounding crazy or like she was getting deeper than she wanted to admit? Because she was. It wasn't simply her persistent health issues or the meds she was on that complicated matters. No, this was more than that. Britt had become entangled in something much worse, with individuals who did not forgive betrayal and surely would not let their pawns walk away. Her mother's name, Liesel Albrecht, was the first that came to mind. If Britt attempted to flee, if she even considered crossing outside the neatly defined borders, the people she worked for would retaliate, and Liesel would be their first target. But there was someone more that Britt had been silently sheltering without anyone's knowledge, Rocco Falconeri. Rocco's childhood was steeped in mysteries that only a few people actually understood, and Britt had lately acquired information connecting those secrets to the exact individuals pulling her strings now. She could not risk putting him in danger. Not yet. Not until she had leverage. Instead of dashing into Jason's arms, as part of her long-to, Britt crossed her arms and gave him a well-practiced expression of uncertainty. "You don't understand," she said quietly, her voice cracking slightly despite her best efforts to appear strong. "It's not that simple," Jason grimaced, feeling the weight of her words but knowing she wasn't ready to reveal the whole truth. He moved closer, lowering his voice so that only her could hear. "Then make me understand. If someone threatens you, we can handle it. You are not alone in this," but Britt was not convinced. She'd seen enough to realize that it wasn't simply about Jason's ability to defend her. This was about forces Jason didn't completely understand, and she couldn't bring him into it without endangering them both. As the week progressed, the tension increased. Pascal, one of the persons in charge of her involvement in this murky operation, told her that everything was under control. "The WSB's here," he said quietly one evening as they crossed paths in a dimly lighted hallway. "It's being handled." Britt initially believed him. She wanted to believe him. But it didn't add up. The patterns were off, the timing was odd, and there were minor factors that gnawed at her instincts. It wasn't until later, following a seemingly unrelated interaction at the hospital, that her suspicions were undeniable. She noticed Vaughn and Jocelyn Jacks together, their presence curiously purposeful, and their inquiries strategically put. And that's when it hit me, they weren't who they claimed to be. The understanding caused a chill to run through her veins. Vaughn and Jocelyn were hardly casual spectators. They were agents, WSB operatives planted deep in this mess, possibly with their own agendas. Pascal's interactions, hidden messages, and promises of protection all took on a new, darker significance. If the WSB got involved, the stakes would be far higher than Britt had imagined. They weren't just dealing with one renegade faction or a few important players, this was much bigger, with secrets dating back years. And if Jason found out, he would never let her go through it alone. This scared her as much as it reassured her. Meanwhile, Alexis returned to her office, the restraining order neatly folded in her suitcase but weighing like a mountain. She realized she couldn't afford to break apart, especially now that Drew was increasing the conflict. Scout deserved to have someone in her corner, and Alexis was determined to keep her granddaughter near. But Alexis had no idea, nor did anybody else, that Drew's move against her was about more than just family or custody. It was linked to the same mysterious powers pursuing Britt, Vaughn, Jocelyn, and the WSB. Their paths were on a collision track, and the result would be explosive. By the end of the week, Britt was pacing her apartment late into the night, repeating every memory and clue in an attempt to figure out who was working for whom. There were too many unresolved questions and truths hidden beneath layers of duplicity. She couldn't shake the impression that someone, possibly several people, was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. With Jason's offer hanging in the back of her mind, she realized she'd have to make a decision. One that could either save or destroy everything. According to General Hospital teasers, Jason Morgan may be able to spare Jocelyn, Jax, and Vaughn from death. Will Jason emerge as a surprise hero for the besieged WSB agents? Jocelyn returned to her apartment near the end of the August 22 episode, only to discover that Vaughn had disappeared. Pascal appeared shortly later with a gun and indicated that he could arrange a reunion, so Jocelyn will be escorted to wherever Vaughn is being detained. Of course, an assassin had previously attempted and failed to remove Vaughn off the map. That hitman could have killed both Jocelyn and Vaughn if Joss hadn't intervened, thus the danger level is very high. Vaughn and Jocelyn should consider themselves blessed to be alive at this time. When things go wrong on a WSB job, there is always the possibility of a tragic outcome. Being held prisoner is preferable to being killed on the spot, but Jocelyn and Vaughn may not survive long unless someone intervenes, particularly Jason, who is also on the site. Whenever Jason appears in a plot, he almost always plays the hero. GH watchers have seen it happen numerous times. Jason is already attempting to save Britt Westbourne from her current circumstances, but he may also be able to help Vaughn and Jocelyn. This could even become a team effort if Britt joins Joss in Vaughn's rescue. It would be entertaining to watch Jason and Britt team up as they take a major risk together, especially because it could result in some flying sparks. Regardless, once Jason discovers Jocelyn is on the grounds, you can know he will do all in his ability to save Carly Spencer's precious kid. Jason may not have all of the information, but the most important thing is that Jocelyn returns home safely. General Hospital spoilers suggest that Jason may receive devastating Jocelyn news and take action for both her and Vaughn, so stay tuned. General Hospital spoilers show that viewers can't get enough of the chemistry between Sonny Corinthos and ADA Justine Turner. The forbidden fruit factor adds to the allure, given that he is a crime boss and she is the ADA. However, GH fans are aware that Sonny has had multiple flings with the ladies of the law, so this clandestine encounter is not unprecedented. Let's look at some of his more memorable moments. Sonny is a coffee mobster. Back in the day, Sonny and FBI agent Hannah Scott became so close that the FBI sent in her father, Roy DeLuca, to calm things down. Sonny eventually discovered the connection, but only after Roy infiltrated his group. Given Sonny's thirst for vengeance, Hannah is fortunate to be alive. Then there was federal attorney Claire Walsh, whom Jasper Jax asked to charge Sonny with the death of his wife. Jax never expected Claire and Sonny would start a romantic relationship. Finally, his mob affiliations contributed to their breakup. Will Sonny tango with Justine? In the present, Justine is clearly falling for Mr. Dimples. Their banter has gradually shifted from confrontational to flirtatious. When she hurt her ankle at a softball game, Sonny took care of her and drove her to GH. Later, he sent her flowers anonymously, but she knew they were from Sonny. What happens next in Port Charles? Justine chastised him for doing so, citing the possibility that such a gift may be considered inappropriate. Sonny took the tongue-lashing in stride, but there was no doubting the tension between them. Later, Justine arrived at Sonny's place to apologize and ended up staying for homemade pizza. We believe that a homemade supper is far more incriminating than a random bundle of flowers. Tell us, GH lovers, do you believe history is repeating itself? How do you feel about a possible romance between Justine and Sonny? Do you believe they have spark, or is this a dead-end road? In the heart of Port Charles, where secrets festered in the shadows and danger lurked around every corner, Jocelyn Jacks and Vaughn Anderson's lives were on the line. The two young WSB agents, famed for their tenacity and unwavering commitment to justice, had become entangled in a trap so expertly planned that escape appeared impossible. Their mission, which had begun with the promise of exposing a criminal conspiracy endangering the very fabric of the city, had taken a dangerous turn. They were now locked in a disused warehouse on the outskirts of town, chained and gagged, with time running out. The air was thick with the aroma of rust and damp concrete, and the distant buzz of machinery added to the gravity of their situation. Their captors, operatives of the secretive gang known only as the Circle, had abandoned them, leaving no hope of rescue. Yet, in the most unlikely of circumstances, a figure from the past emerged, a guy whose name carried weight in Port Charles, and whose reputation was both revered and feared, Jason Morgan. Jason, a man who had walked the edge between hero and outlaw for decades, was no stranger to the instability that characterized Port Charles. His life had been a tapestry of violence, loyalty, and redemption, held together by the unbreakable links he had with those he loved. Jason, a former hitman for the Corinthos Group, has grown over the years, changing his moral compass but never veering from his main convictions. He defended people who were important to him, even if it meant getting into the line of fire. Jason considered Jocelyn, Carly Corinthos' daughter, to be more than simply a friend's child. She was family, a young woman he had watched develop from a lively girl into a tough, determined agent. Vaughn, though less known to him, was her partner, and Jason's ethics did not allow for abandoning those in need. He didn't hesitate when word spread through his informant network of a botched WSB operation and the disappearance of two agents. The call to action was instinctual, honed over years of navigating the dangerous underworld. The warehouse was a decaying fortress, with walls discolored by time and neglect. Jason arrived at night, his motions stealthy and precise, a predator in his environment. He'd explored the perimeter, noting the guards stationed at major entry points and the dim illumination of security cameras in the dark. His years of expertise trained him to read situations like a book, and this one screamed ambush. The Circle was no amateur organization. They were organized, brutal, and well-funded, with connections to the highest levels of authority. Jason understood that going in with weapons blazing would be fatal, not only for him, but also for Jocelyn and Vaughn. Instead, he relied on stealth, passing through the outer fortifications with the ease of a ghost. His thoughts raced, piecing together the building's plan from brief glimpses through cracked windows and corroded vents. Inside, Jocelyn and Vaughn were hoping for a miracle, and Jason was determined to be it. Inside the warehouse, Jocelyn strained against her chains, her wrists sore from the scratchy rope that bound them. Her experience as a WSB agent had prepared her for high-risk operations.